Hello, welcome back to Lucky Number 13 video. And in this one, I want to use it as kind of a catch-all for the remaining options and just kind of go through a couple of different menus. And then I want to get down into the callouts, talk about it a little bit more, and then how to set up the endpoints to work with the Cloud Automation Appliance that we put out there. And then also talk about the cloud credentials for AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud for the native DNS, Route 53, and others. But in this video, I had to redo this so you can, again, see some of the results instead of me going through the actual steps. Just a couple of the things I wanted to talk about on the import wizards. So the CLI API guide, take a look at it. These align to each of those. You can import address pools, subnets, containers, devices, resource records for devices in addition to the APTR, domains, domain resource records, root blocks, and zones. So that gives you a very broad spectrum of things that you would do on maybe a day or weekly, monthly basis. There are other imports that we do through the command lines, and we'll have a whole separate video on the command lines. But those are going to be things like the import of network elements, import Galaxy domains, or some things that you might not be doing regularly that would be done some other means. So that's something there. The database management, as we're dealing with data, you are over time running discoveries, collections, snapshots. You're going to have this audit database that's going to grow. And depending on what your organization's requirements are, you may have to maintain this for a year or 2 years or even longer in some cases. Whatever the case is, you can maintain it online, but we do recommend that if you're going to need something for 2 years or longer, and you have a very large set of audit data, that you want to maintain that offline. And we do have a tool called the IPAM Auditor that I'll cover in another video, maybe not part of this series, but in one. And then with all of these tasks, you can run this nightly, tell it to check for the audits, anything older than a certain number of days, like anything older than a year, delete it, one of those. It'll then every night run a task, clean it, delete what's there, and then you can tell it to run this daily at a specific time, weekly, monthly, however you want to do the management of the zones. So just want to point that out for the database and how that gets managed there. The other things you'll have here, allocation reason codes. This is something that you may have seen in the site templates, allows us to set a code. And we might want to do 001, we'll say default allocation. Okay. And we don't have any other fields that aren't in here. So this is our reason code. So now when I go in and I take a look at something, let's go into a site down here, hasn't had it yet. And let's do an add site. I'm going to select my branch, and you'll see there's a reason code. Now, this is a predefined or user-defined list of codes that actually get tracked in the audit logs and are explicitly allowed to be defined. So that if you really want to track this to, some type of chargeback codes to an agency or to a group, you can specify what those codes are here. So I want to just point that out. That has been used kind of like an application type definition, and then gives you that really ability to manage that. I then went through some threshold sets. So a threshold set allows you to define things such as percentages. We can set up absolute values. If we're down to, say, 5 absolute IP addresses, I can set up a threshold set for that. And within the threshold sets, you can set up different severities, variables that I mentioned, that available days left, allocated, if we're doing linear regression, be days left, dynamic days left for DHCP, and then we can do absolute numbers or percentages with varying comparators for those numbers. And the idea then is that we run, as part of the global utilization task rollup, that checkbox that enabled us to action this. So when I'll just show you, where it says include alert threshold checking, that's how that would appear. So one thing let's do here, and I'm going to just say, let's see, absolute 1. I just want to see if there's anything out here. And let's just do informational, assigned, absolute, greater than equal to 1. This is probably going to kill me, but I'm going to do it anyway. And I'm going to run this utilization roll up just to see what it's going to do. so that you can see what that's going to do. Okay, now when it does this, it's going to create, if it observes anything, it's going to create it there. And actually, I can't do that. I need to do one more thing. So we create the threshold sets, and then we need to apply them. So we can apply them at the container level, where I can go into, say, organization A, and I can apply, like I did earlier, the 85%, 95%. Now let's go into my org A, apply to child, and let's do back to the private data, because that's where I was at, and absolute 1, and tell it to do this. And this is what's going to trigger that. So the roll-up's there, but I'm going to go ahead and do another roll-up just to trigger that. And I hope at some point, yep, as you'll see here, that we're going to start getting values, and you'll start seeing that you have, here's some observed values. Now, why do I do that? Well, we have this high end. We know that as we get to the end of the utilization and availability, we want to know proactively. I want to be able to scale starting at maybe 65, 70, and then to be able to trend it historically and set up some values that say based on historical trending, if I have, and at 75% now, I have approximately 3 weeks. And it can give me that kind of data, and I can set up alerts for that. Well, on the other side of this house is you have these subnets, and over time and migrations and things we would do, you don't know that they're used or not, or they are. We do pings, we do other things. But then you have the DHCP, you have other means of looking at this. So we can look then at our subnets and say if there are no IP addresses in these, or there's less than one, set an observed value and trigger, and we could get all subnets that have 0 addresses assigned or something that has minimal addresses assigned. So it's another way of tracking the highs and the lows when you think about the alerting there, which I think also is key for the process. All right. And then moving forward here, we have the block thresholds. And so you can do this again by network and then have it run the same thing. So that's how the alerts work. Now with those alerts, and I'm going to show you this shortly, is the events and the endpoints that we can actually do something with that. And that's where we're going to go here in just a minute. And now the next part of this is going to be the cloud credentials. We have today, and in IPControl 15, we have the ability to manage DNS resource records in Route 53, Azure Net DNS, and then Google Cloud DNS natively. You would define your cloud credentials by their type. AWS, you have your secret key, account, regions, maybe some ARNs for roles. Google, you might have some other credentials and keys you would paste. And in Microsoft, we have some other things for Azure. But in this particular case, then, if you have, let's say, Route 53, and you want us to manage it, we do this through Software Development Kit. So you set up the key, the credential, and the account. And when we go out and set in DNS, we'll go to Add DNS, and we're going to set up the DNS server. You tell it the type, and then you specify the account ID, and that's how we'll link the two together. And then when we go to the zones, unlike how we did with IPControl and the managed delegated zone, where we actually create it locally, deploy it to a server, and then manage it, these stay in the cloud. We're pulling information back from a view perspective. These are all of the zones, which we can then search through and filter down to, public, private, etc. And then each of these zones then have their resource records. And we can add, delete, modify these resource records, and then have these updated through Software Development Kit and API immediately to the cloud. So this now gives you that ability to just plug in, click on the server, see all of the zones that are currently out there and have access to them immediately. But also note that we won't be creating domains for those. We don't create zones of any kind of delegation. And if you want to do forwarding for those cloud zones, we still would need to go through a level of importing and forwarding. So just keep that in mind as we work forward. And we'll probably have some other videos here for importing and CLIs and other things for that purpose. Now I want to get down to the events, and I'm sorry to cut that short on the other, but in the events, we have a couple of procedures or pretty much everything that can be actionable. For the software agents we supply, for the appliances, for services running on the appliance, to transactions that occur in the IP address, IPAM database. So the device add, delete, modify, block, add, delete, modify, domains, tasks, things like it. So there's a lot of different types of transactions that we can interface to through event callouts. So as the event occurs and it's audit it and transact, we can then say that there's a call out, either a REST API that goes to the CAA or a script locally that runs Ruby, Tomcat, Python, some type, not Tomcat, but Python, Perl script, something that has a script ability, and then the type of format you want us to pass to that process. So now with this, I've gone in and I've created device add. And let me step back. So on the endpoint then, I want to use the CAA to show this and demonstrate it. So I have on my CAA, I've created the request URL. And on my CAA, I'll show you is a workflow. And that workflow is called device add. And that's all it does is it accepts a JSON payload. It responds 200 just immediately and then just logs it. But we can do something with this at a later time. That's what we want to get to. And then it has a login URL, so it goes out and gets a token and then is enabled to pull the data out of the database through API and upload it. So this endpoint then I can specify as an event endpoint so that whenever that transaction occurs, it'll kick off an endpoint for that. Now, one thing you do need to have and do is on the IPControl executive. Whenever you make a modification to this, it will tell you here, for any changes to take effect, you have to restart the callout manager. So because this doesn't occur a lot, it will in our video as we're going through it, but later it won't. Once it's defined, you typically leave it alone, but you do have to go out to the executive appliance or manager, and under opt-in control etc, it's /cm space restart. That will restart the callout manager, restarts the new definition and policies, anything we've defined, changed, and then we should be able to see a log effectively that will show us the status. Can't do that. Let's try log. Okay. And when this says ready, I'll know it's ready, and I'll go ahead and proceed and we'll demonstrate this. Okay, so it says it's waiting. That's what I meant by ready. And we'll now go to the subnet that I was working within, and we're going to go ahead and just assign a server address. And we'll show you how that will react to it there in the format. I have the name, I have my domain defaults, everything. I can go ahead and update DNS as well. And I should see immediately a transaction that shows me here, as I did. Here's the REST API, here's the JSON in IP address format that is sent off to the Cloud Automation Appliance. The Cloud Automation Appliance received it. Here's the token that it received for the login, and then it has all of the information about that IP address. It has the ID, it has the date time string, and then it has a device object that then breaks down to the device object format, all of the detail about the IP assignment. And we can swap this order. We can say we want it in device order with an IP address sub-object or IP address and so on. You'll also see the number of containers. So when we deal with this from an API, we would deal with this in context. If we only wanted the logical, we would look at these and confirm that. So this is how that looks, and this is how that JSON payload works, and it posts it up to this application. And then from here, I can do pretty much anything I want to with it. I can format it and do some emails, set up some nice tabling and structure, and I'm going to do that, I think, in another video. So that's the endpoints, the callouts. I did want to show this. This is probably something that I would do in more structure. In my other system, I had this set up, and this again what I'm going to do here. And in the add block, I would set up a different type post URL, and I would put in what the function was, so that I could use a single workflow, set up a root node that would actually calculate or check each of those values, whichever one of these APIs it was running, and then it would run a different workflow and functions accordingly. And in doing so, it gave me more control and flexibility about what was coming in, what the expected format should be, and some other things that DevOps would be interested in, as you move forward. So that is going to be, I think, the end of this series in the video. Other than, let's go up to the Swagger interface here. Just want to cover this real quick, and then we're going to come back to this in more context. So the executive appliance and the callout, the Cloud Automation Appliance, both provide APIs, REST APIs. They both provide a Swagger interface where you can log in using your IPControl credentials and their permissions and tests, everything basically. So you can go out, say, to device. Let's see if I'm authorized here. Let's go ahead and do this, and I'll just show you a couple of examples here. Oh, I am logged in, so let's log out, log back in. Your permissions here, of course, are tied to that policy tab, and that you have, in fact, the web and the CLI, or at least the CLI access defined, so you can access the devices here. So what I want to do then is I want to do child blocks, and I'm going to show you just a real quick export function. So we have here basically filters, and I don't necessarily know what that is, but these are going to tie back, and when we come back to this, we're going to go over it. But I'm going to do just name contains, and just empty single quotes. I'm going to take out any policies, and I'm going to tell it that I want up to 100 subnets back. I'm going to try to keep that as easy as possible. So what this really is doing is it's saying that any subnet block that has a name, that has really anything in it, give me 100 of the subnets, or whatever, 100 of the objects, and then stop. Now, if there's 1,000, it only stops at 100 because it's based on the page size. And then there's also policies that are going to give you other abilities to limit this. But the point here is that we can set up and break down and do the whole number. There's a number of different APIs that are called in this process to help us formulate this data and pull it back. But this is a real simple way of doing it. There's a number of different selectors we provide. And this really is one of the strengths of our APIs. We've been doing this for 18, 20 years almost, and sometimes longer in two different products, but we did it through SOAP XML, 10 years at least with the REST APIs, and we've been doing this with very large platforms and supports. We've kind of worked through this in different environments and markets and enterprises and so on. So we have a very powerful tool set available for the APIs that you can interface today. The Cloud Automation Appliance also provides an API interface, Swagger, same thing, because it's a Tomcat service. It just doesn't have the database. It connects to a backend layer for that. But the idea with the Cloud Automation is you have an endpoint locally to those, if you want to call the native APIs, wherever you deploy a new CAA. So if you're deploying automation appliances geographically, that geographic region would point to their local CAAs, either IPControl APIs natively, REST APIs, or workflows you've designed for them to do. So in our coming videos, we're going to go into this in a little bit more detail. I'll talk about some exports, imports, and kind of cover some details I think that help with the DevOps team. And anything else I find that I might have missed out here, I'm going to come back to, and we'll cover there. But actually, I'm going to take few more minutes here, and let's cover some reports while we're at it, and we'll finish the series up here. The utilization reporting, we have, basically it's based on utilization from IP addresses. And then it's based on a combination of filters that you want, and that would represent things like the types of subnets you're allocating, user-definable fields, or subnets attached to those fields, v4, v6, and various counters. So what they don't have in here, really is the ability to schedule. It's kind of a real-time thing. Let's just take a look at it. But we have other things that we've worked with in terms of reporting and automation of reports, which we've done through the automation appliance, which I'm gonna come back to at some point. But in this terms here, we're looking at utilization. So we have subnet block utilization with filters on the left again. This is going to show you all of the blocks, and then the ability to filter on the columns that you think are important, and then export that data out to different formats. So the reporting aspect of it is, search, filter, export. Search, filter, export. That's effectively that functionality there. The audit categories are all enabled based on policies to audit all the transactions related to containers. So the add, delete, modify of anything that's added, including the user-definable fields, whether those are updated, added, or deleted. You then have subnet blocks. Same type function with date and time and filtering and sorting. You also have that reason code I mentioned. So as we did that last, we didn't set it, but if we did it last, you'd have that. Then you have down to the IP device. So any type of IP assignment, DHCP, manual DHCP, any collected DHCP would be categorized here, max, and they would show as their type and collections. You're then going to get down into your resource records. So this is any type of resource record at a domain level, basically, or even a device. That goes into the domains, of course. And add, APTR, CNAME, anything that's been add, deleted, modified, the event types. Then you're going to get down into the administrator definitions. creating administrators if they're externally created. So you can set up, here reports of here are all the externally created administrators and what their default rules were, what their permissions are. So this is very helpful for troubleshooting or understanding who's active, who's not active. Then you have what those administrators' activity is. Now this here, we need to unfreeze this to kind of see better results. It doesn't really give you a good filter here other than changing it, but it shows you everything by administrator. Whatever process it is, just kind of throws it all into a table for view, and then you can kind of filter out by type. So if you want to filter down by specifics, and then export that. Then we got to get down into the logins, which is helpful for understanding where the login, the last date and time, and the session, if we're tracking this for troubleshooting. Your delegated prefixes. When we deal with IPv6, we have a delegated prefix functionality to basically build the delegated portion that the router or some device holds onto to allocate to devices. And we can then collect what that prefix information is and see it in its assignments. So we know here that we can track that data, and this is how we track it. And then any address match lists that you want to track are also captured here. Now I'm going to go over here to the system and policies real quick, and you're going to see a whole series of different audits. You'll see some that say internal, external, disable both. Internal means what we've seen. We're going to have an audit log table. We'll view it here. And external is our IPAM database. So where you can have it both, you can specify internal, external, both. Right? Where it's only internal or external, you'll see here, like this is only external or it's disabled. So the administrator policies, the audit agents are external only, the audit appliances are external only, and then we get down some others that are internal here that we do today, and then others are external only as well. So we do in that IPAM audit database like enable, disable these different policies. And that's what controls effectively what you're going to see externally and how much more data we can enable this policy for. So we can give you more data than you want to have, but some of this is going to go into an IPAM auditor that's an external data store. So again, I think that's where we're going to stay with this, and then I want to get into some CLI, some APIs in the next few calls, the workflows coming up. And then we have a whole number of things in terms of the appliance. And I guess I should show you this again. It'll take a few more minutes here. But then we have the appliance dashboard. And this dashboard gives us kind of a real-time view of what's going on in the appliance. And I have a patch I need to apply here. But it tells us, again, like DHCP, whether they're a failover pair, whether the pair is successful or how it's working. The status, which is going to give us some of these counters. So in the DNS queries per second, memory, file system storage, CPU storage, all of that. You can then add this to the portal so you can see it from your home page or disable it in that regard. And then you can also add additional columns if you have it, services like DHCP. So if this were a server, it would register its capability and you could pick and choose that from the list. And then you have the details, which is basically start, stop, process. These are the events that we capture through that events callout that we can also trigger through the callout manager to do something with it in the callout appliance. And then we have effectively down to the manage function. Now this might take a second to get to it. And what it does when it loads the system is it connects with the appliance. And the appliance basically tells us, based on this version, here are all of my capabilities. So what is effectively happening now is behind the scenes, it's downloading all of its capabilities and it's building the interface based on this appliance version, which features and functions are there, what values are set, and should present to me here at some point the ability to see the interface and go through the different management. Once I click that button. So here we have in the main menu, when it loads up, we'll see our network configuration. And this basically pulls in all of the details. Your set, toggle functions are on the right-hand side of the page. But this will go through all the interfaces. One thing about our appliances is we support up to 10 IP addresses per interface. So you have secondary IPs that allow us through migration to take over servers' IPs, like migrate from an ISC or Windows, take over its IP, its scopes and everything, and then still keep the helpers the same. So we do that quite a bit. Also, you would see any type of access controls, and you would see any kind of anycast configurations, date time, IPControl settings, logging, high availability for VRRP services, and some others. So for SNMP and other capabilities. You then can stop-start services. You can then run certain logs and diagnostics and kind of see all of the information here through this interface. So it gives you a nice little interface to do some controls here to execute and run specific features and functions and management of that. So that's what I want to show you, and that's the last one there, I think, in terms of the reporting and the client's dashboard, or maybe one more here. Again, I could chat forever. The alerts we saw, so we already know the reports and the alerts. We already saw that screen. But then we have the DNS zone report, and this will be the last one here. So I deal with customers who have upwards of 20,000 DNS domains and zones. And so when I'm dealing with trying to locate what servers have what forward domains that I need to go out, change an IP address for forward, or do something in bulk. And I'm going to expect to have so many servers in potentially tens of thousands of domains, etc. So what this gives me the ability to do is I can go out and do a wildcard type search, and even be more specific that if I wanted to search for a domain, and I can then see the type of zone type. I can filter by those types. So again, if I were looking for my forward, I would do that. There's none there. But if I wanted to see the primary servers, I could see that. And then I can do fully qualified domain, type, galaxy, and other information. So this has been a very helpful utility to help you do with the reporting to see, really what's going on out there in terms of the domains for management and updating. And I use that all the time to do it. And then over here in the DHCP, you have the same thing. If you want to see how subnets are deployed, which ones are dynamically defined, what type of subnet if you want to filter out to the subnet, and then the failovers and others. So this is very helpful in that regard. But then also the DNS option and getting to those reports up there are also very helpful. Okay, so I'm going to leave it at the 27-minute mark here. And the next video, I'm not sure, but we'll come back and we'll figure out how to get on with the automation more and talk about that. Thank you, take care, and see you in the next video.